Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Healing Brain. This is our weekly webinar here at Doman International, where parents join us from around the world with children with special needs, and they ask us their most pressing and biggest questions, and we do our best to answer them. So wherever you are in the world right now and wherever you're watching, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube, you can just type your questions into the comments box, and we will get to your questions in order. Well, today we've got a special topic, which is how can I improve the speech of my child with special needs? This is one of the most common questions we get because problems with speech development are one of the most common symptoms that children with special needs have. And for some children, they might even have no words of speech, maybe have been diagnosed as nonverbal. Or there might be certain children who have poor speech, maybe with articulation or limited speech. And so I'm going to try to give some recommendations today. So no matter where your child's speech development is, you leave the session with some helpful recommendations. Well, before I jump into the speech development recommendations, I do want to just make some quick announcements about Doman International and what we're doing in the upcoming months. So looking forward, our next trip is going to be to our European Institute in Italy. So our team will be seeing families from around Europe and the Middle East at our European Center in Pisa, Italy. In May, we have evaluations planned in New Delhi, India, and in Bangalore, India. We did have evaluations planned in Dubai in May as well, but right now that's on hold. Just because of problems with traveling in and out of the UAE. In June, we have appointments in Australia. In July, we're back at our European Center in Italy. So if, again, you want an appointment in the summer in Europe, that's the place to be. In August, we see families in New Zealand, and then finally in September in Serbia and Croatia. So if you're interested in being seen in any of those locations, you can always reach out to us. And Colleen Hudson, our Director of Representatives, who's here with me right now, will answer any questions you have.
Yeah.
Colleen, did I miss any announcements about appointments?
No, I think you covered everything. I will say that as always, but especially as we're heading into the summer months when a lot of families look to schedule appointments, because if they have other children or if their kids are in school, it tends to be a more convenient time for a lot of people to schedule appointments with us. So if you've been thinking about it, please don't hesitate. We don't have unlimited spaces by any means. So I hate to disappoint families because they waited and thought, oh, a month in advance is more than enough time. It really isn't. So if you have an inkling that you'd like an appointment anytime in the next few months, get in touch with me and we can start moving toward that. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right. Well, so I'm going to share my screen now and pull up a PowerPoint presentation. And I'm just going to run through some hopefully helpful recommendations about speech development. Colleen, can you see the full screen where it says Foundations of Speech Development? Great.
Yes, I can.
So one of the common reasons why speech is one of the most affected areas of brain development for children with special needs and developmental delay is because there are usually about 8 to 12 different regions of the brain that coordinate together to produce speech. And so if you can imagine, if just one of those 8 to 12 areas has been impacted in its development, it's going to likely affect a child's speech. And usually when there is an injury that occurs in the brain, it affects many areas of the brain. So it's often that multiple of those 8 to 12 areas have been affected. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so common that children have speech development issues. So there are some general rules that we give to parents of children with special needs about how to encourage speech development. And I will be giving you specific activities during the session that you can begin right away that can be helpful, but also, it's not just about the activities you do, it's about how you interact with your child, how you respond to your child. That encourages speech development. I also want to say that these general rules are helpful for all babies and young children as well, because what we found is when we do these same activities with young neurotypical children, their speech also develops faster. So the first general rule is when your child speaks and attempts to speak, it's very important to listen closely. It's actually quite common that I have a family in my office, and I had this recently. There was a child playing on the floor of my office in Italy, and the child said the word ball. He was playing with a ball and he said ball. And this was a child that parents had just told me a few minutes before he doesn't say any meaningful words. So I said to the parents, he just said ball. Did you hear that? And they said, what? What? We just thought he was making sounds. So it's very important to listen carefully to your child. And even if you don't think they're saying meaningful words yet, the listening is a very important part of some of the next steps that I'm going to be discussing, which require you to respond to the things your child is saying. And so listening is the first key. Plus, I will say, if a parent is actively listening, the child is going to make more attempts to speak if they know there's someone out there who's trying to hear them and listen to them. It's very important to acknowledge your child when your child speaks to you. Always respond to your child, right? So if your child, even if your child makes a sound to you and they've directed it at you, even if you don't know what they're trying to say, respond to your child. You can reply with something like, wow, I didn't know that, right? Or you could say, that's so interesting, right? Because what is happening is children are talking, they just talk with very poor quality, right? This happens with babies very, often. They start talking in the first months of life, but their speech is not well articulated. And so this leads to some adults not listening, ignoring, not responding. So it's very important to respond to your child's speech. If your child says something, or even just makes a sound, and they see you're listening and you acknowledge them and you respond to them, they're going to be far more likely to keep producing sounds. It's always great to give specific meaning to your child's sounds, right? So let me give an example of this, right? So let's say a child makes the sound da-da, right? Well, if it's a baby or a young child or a child with special needs, very commonly parents will say, oh, the child is babbling, right? They'll say, they don't really mean dad. They're just saying dada, right? The most important thing that you can do is assign a meaning, right? So the way you would do that is if a child said dada, you would say, oh, you're looking for dad, let's go to the other room and find dad, right? Or you might say, oh, if dad's out, you could say, oh, you know what? You just said dad, let's look at a photo of dad on the phone. So it's very important. Now, a parent might say, but Spencer, you don't know that the child, when they say dad means dad. It's true. I don't know that. But what we can do as adults is give a specific meaning to a child's sounds and respond to them accordingly. Because then, let's say the child was just babbling and saying dad for no meaningful reason. Well, if you respond with, let's go and find dad, or let's look at a picture of dad, the child starts to realize, wow, when I make the sound dad, she always responds like I want dad. So maybe I should use dad when I want dad, right? So, this is a very effective way to give meaning to child sounds and for children to be more meaningful. Now, something I've always wondered is, the word mom or mama is used in dozens, perhaps even hundreds of different languages around the world. And I always wonder, is it a coincidence that the word for mom is so similar to one of the most common babbled sounds, mama, that babies make? My guess is that's not a coincidence, right? And so when babies, I've seen this from every culture around the world, a baby babbles, mama, mama, and mom will say, "Mom, you're calling mom. She said mom," and so I think sometimes babies probably randomly make the sound mama, and mom responds and says, "You want mom," right? And the baby thinks, well, maybe I wasn't calling for you, but you know what? Now from now on, I will by saying mama, right? So very important to give specific meaning to your child's sounds and to respond to them consistently. Don't just speak to your child, speak with your child. So what this means is there has been research done where they looked at different kinds of parents and watched how they replied and responded to their babies. And then they watched how quickly the baby's speech developed. What they found is that when children make sounds, small children, who are still producing meaningful sounds, they find that parents respond in one of three ways. So, first of all, there are some parents who ignore baby sounds. So the baby goes ba 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 ba, and parent ignores it. They just think, it's a baby making sounds. What's the point? So, group number one, parents who ignore. Not surprisingly, the parents that ignore, those children have the least speech results. So, ignoring a child's speech is the worst possible thing to do. The second group of parents are parents who mimic children's sounds. So if the child goes ba 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 ba, the parent will go back and say, make the sound back to the child, like ba 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 ba, like that. And children, first of all, don't like that. They tend to find it annoying. I recently saw a reel where parents, who I think these were like speech pathologist parents, they posted a video of them and their probably 10-month-old child. And the child would make a sound like dad, dad, dad. And the parents would just reply back, dad, 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 dad. And the parents kept doing this. And the child kept making sounds and the parents kept mimicking them back. And these parents who were speech pathologists were like, look how amazing this is. Like, look how inspired our child is to speak. I watched the video. It became very clear as you watch the video, the child was getting very annoyed with the parents. So the child would go like, da, 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 and the parents would go back, da, 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 da. And you could see the child was almost basically offended that the parents were just mimicking back their sounds. And it was funny because I watched it and, came away with a completely different response, which is your child is annoyed that you're basically mocking them. And I'm not saying the parents meant to mock the child, but that's how the child took it, because that's how we would all respond if someone was mimicking the way we talked. And so that's the second group of parents. The third group of parents are parents who reply to their child as if they're having a conversation, right? So child goes ba, 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 and the parent will say like, oh, that's so interesting. Thanks for telling me that. Or they'll say, ma, 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 ma. Well, maybe the parent would say, oh, mom, you want mom, right? They always respond as if they're having a conversation. And what they found in the research is that parents that have that response to their children, those children have the fastest speech development. Okay. So very important to listen, respond, give meaning to your child's specific sounds, and respond accordingly, and really speak with your child. Reply as if you're having a conversation. It's a really way to keep your child engaged, because your child, if you go, oh, that's so interesting, thank you for telling me, your child will realize a lot of the time that you still don't understand what they're saying, because children are very smart intuitively at knowing that. I recently, I was with my 2-year-old nephew, and he said something to me, and, I didn't understand what he said, but I pretended like I did. I went, wow, that's so smart. Thanks for telling me. And he could tell he didn't get what I said. And he repeated it several more times until I got it. And I thought, wow, isn't that bright? I couldn't trick him, but he kind of, saw through me. But he did know that I was trying, right? He did know, all right, this guy, Uncle Spencer, is trying to listen to me, right? Much better than if I ignored him, maybe he would have stopped trying. So, children will work with you if you work with them. And then always just you got to be really patient for your child's response. It's interesting, many children with special needs have something called the system response time delay. So if you go and you interact with them and you say hi, and then you walk away, if you watch that child 5-6 seconds later, you might see the hand come up, you might see them go like something like that to try to greet you. But if you've already walked away because you haven't waited patiently for them to reply to you, that child starts to become very cynical and they actually stop trying to talk. So very, very important to be patient and give your child the space to talk. All right, now I'm going to skip forward a little bit and we're going to get into some specific activities that are helpful. So the first activity we're going to discuss are singing songs. This is one of the basic speech development activities, which is good for nearly any child, even children who are classified as nonverbal, who do not talk. This can be a very helpful first speech activity to do. Colleen, can you see the happy birthday song up now?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. So let me give you an example of how this would work. So imagine you take the song Happy Birthday and you're going to sing the song to your child 3 times a day for 3 days. So 3 times a day for 3 days, that would be 9 total times. You're just going to sing the song to your child. So a session would look something like you'd say, all right, let's sing the song Happy Birthday. Are you ready? And you sing it. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Sally. Happy birthday to you. And you do that 3 times a day for 3 days. Okay. Then starting on day 4, you're going to drop a word for your child to fill in. Okay. So now what you're going to do is you're going to say, all right, the last word, you, is going to be your word. All right. Are you ready, Sally? Let's go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Sally. Happy birthday to. And you wait, right? And now your child's job is to fill in the word you. And I always say to parents, when you do this, especially the first time, children will often, after a couple seconds, they realize, oh, wow, they're not going to finish the song. I need to finish the song, right? And it might even take them 10, 15, 20 seconds to even get a sound out. Sometimes you'll see them moving their arms and legs. They get so excited. And when the sound comes out, right, they might go, right? That might be their sound for you, right? Or it might be ooh, or something like that. It doesn't matter in those first sessions how well they articulate the word. What is important is that you and them know, both you and your child know, they're trying to say the word you. And so you go, yes, that's right. You said you. Fantastic. So you're breaking basically the sound barrier and allowing for you and your child to sing a song together. And so on day 4, you start to let them fill in that last word. And from then on out, you allow your child to say that word. Now, Colleen, sorry, someone's knocking at my door.
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
mind just talking a little bit about your experience
Yes.
doing these activities with Olivia when she was a baby?
Absolutely, positively. Yeah, no problem at all. So, hi everyone. It's Colleen. As Spencer mentioned, my daughter Olivia, who is now 21 years old, she grew up with the benefit of a program, from the newborn stage, and we did exactly these techniques. She's a neurotypical kid, but still to increase our communication, to encourage her to begin to associate, the sounds that she was making with actions on my part. It was really cool to be able to communicate with her from the time she was very small. So so we did poems, a lot of poems, because it's fun to. I love poetry. My dad read poetry to us when we were growing up, and rhyming things are fun. And there are so many short poems that are easy to remember and to recite again and again. I mean, Mary Had a Little Lamb is a classic, but there were other poems that we read. And later on, I was able to combine that with her reading program, which was a lot of fun also. And we also did this in other languages because I was introducing her to Japanese. So we would sometimes, I would have these poems in Japanese and have her, just wait for her to make a sound. And it really does happen. I mean, children, they get it and they're excited too that we're starting to have these lines of communication open up. A kid's mission is to get parents to do what they want. I mean, it's a survival instinct. So when we can make that less guesswork and more purposeful, everybody's happier. And I found that she was a very calm baby. I think a lot as a result. She knew she was being listened to. And even as she got older, I mean, she spoke pretty clearly from a young age, but, even when she didn't, it wasn't like we didn't have a lot of meltdowns. And I think a lot of that had to do with establishing early lines of communication. So even if I didn't understand her immediately, she knew that I would work at it to get there. So I think that's a huge bonus for this program.
Yeah, and we've gotten some really nice comments. So Johanna says, the listening is so hard, even though I've been through the course and know I shouldn't. I didn't hear the words until I did a recording and listened to the audio multiple times. Yeah, that's a great point, Johanna, that I used to discuss more with parents, like record your child's voice and listen back. I recently, this was probably a year or so ago, I was watching a video back of me playing with my nephew when he was something like 5 months old. And I was throwing him up in the air. And, I would say to him, like, do you want me to throw you up again? And he would make an obvious yes kind of answer, like, and I would do it again. And at one point he came back down and I said, do you want me to do it again? And he made a sound. And I could tell it wasn't a yes, but at the time in the video, I went, oh, okay, maybe not. But my sister was watching the video with me and she said to me, he said a little bit. Because I asked him, did you like that? And he had said a little bit, but it wasn't well articulated. He was only about 5 months old. But as soon as she told me that, I listened back and I went, wow, he said a little bit, so clear. But I didn't hear it in that moment. It sounded something like a little bit like that. It was kind of shocking even to me, who's always listening to babies and young children. So it is remarkable. Now with social media, it's nice. I saw a video that went viral recently of a 4-month-old baby saying, I love you. I think people are becoming more aware of the importance of listening. And I think the next activity that I go into, Johanna, would be helpful for you and your child. Before I jump into the next activity, we have another question here on Instagram. If Colleen, maybe you could answer. It's, do you ever plan appointments for Texas? And they're asking specifically, do you have appointments in the Houston, Texas area?
Yeah, so the answer is unfortunately not. However, we do see families, I mean, it's not that much closer, honestly, than Philadelphia, but we do see families twice a year near Fort Lauderdale. So we do go to Florida. And the reason for that, in case people are wondering, well, why Florida and not Texas or not California? A lot of our South American families feel very comfortable in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area and can very easily get there, have family they can stay with. And so because we do have many South American families, we sort of purposely chose that area. But we have remote appointments year round. So for families we do have a lot of parents who travel from Texas, but we also understand that is not the easiest thing for anybody. And for some, it's flat out impossible. So our remote appointments are a tremendously useful option for parents who can't travel right now. We would not offer them if we didn't feel that they were of a very high standard, because once upon a time it was an experiment, and the experiment went so well that we said, all right, we can in good conscience continue to offer this as an option. So please, if you're thinking about an appointment, even though we won't come to Texas, a remote appointment is the way to go if you can't get to us. So contact me directly. If I wonder if this is the parent who, I'm so sorry, I meant to call you last week. If this is the same mother or dad, I just didn't. I was jet lagged. I'm sorry. And catching up on correspondence, but I have you on my list to call today. So if you're the same parent who messaged us last week on Instagram, I'm catching up with you. And if not, send me your contact information and we'll connect.
Yeah, I threw Colleen's contact information up on the screen.
Fabulous.
That's her email and her phone number, so you can contact her there, and you can talk about both in-person and remote appointment options. Okay, let me jump into the next activity that I'm going to recommend. And as I said, even this activity is going to be more for children who already speak somewhat, but their conversational ability could be improved, or their articulation could be improved. So this is called a scripted conversation. And a scripted conversation is a homemade book, which is a common part of the Doman Method reading program. But it is a conversation where parent takes a part and child takes a part, like a script from a play or a movie. So you can see that this scripted conversation is called Waking Up. So these are pages in a homemade book that, this is typed at home and printed and shown to the child. Just like the song, for the first 3 days, 3 times a day, you read it to your child. You just read it. And then starting on day 4, you start to give your child the opportunity to say their parts. So just like a script, you can see mom or dad has a part. So in this case, dad says, good morning, right? And Lisa, who's the child, says, hi. And you can see we've even put her part in red to make it easier for her to remember what her lines are. And dad says, who's bringing you for a walk today? And Lisa says, Mama. And dad says, and who will cook a delicious dinner? And Lisa says, Dad. Okay, so you can see how it works. It's a back and forth, one part for the parent, one part for the child. And for the first 3 days, you just read this out loud to the child. You say, okay, dad says first, good morning. Then Lisa, you're going to say, hi. And when most children begin this, they will repeat after the parent. So parent says, hi. Lisa says, hi, to repeat after parent. And for the first few days or so, the child will just repeat after the parent, right? So you're saying, all right, dad then says, who is bringing you for a walk today? And Lisa, you say mama. And Lisa says mama. You say, great job. So she repeats. Then after 3 days of that, you stop you stop telling your child what to say, and they just say their part spontaneously, right? So you say, and who will cook a delicious dinner? And at this point, they know their part. So Lisa will just say, Dad, back in a consistent and spontaneous way. So the reason why we do scripted conversations is, first of all, it is helpful with developing conversational ability. That's what it is, a conversation. But also for children with special needs, they're often very good visual learners. So when they see what they're supposed to say written out, right, it really helps them with retaining the information and organizing themselves to say it, right? So if you just said, oh, I'm not going to do the book thing, I'm just going to tell my child what to say, many children will not be able to retain their part. But if they see it written, they can. And it allows them to develop that nice, spontaneous back and forth conversational ability that so many parents hope for with their child. So it's always helpful to remember that a visual aid is really good for speech development, right? You saw before the happy birthday song and how we use that with speech development. You could write out happy birthday in very large print that can be really, really helpful for the child to remember what they're supposed to say. In that case, they're just saying the last word, which is you. So for this scripted conversation that we've looked at, for 3 days, you read it to your child, they repeat their part, and then on day 4, you just let them fill in their part spontaneously. We will do a scripted conversation for usually 1 week, maybe 2 weeks maximum. And at that point, children will usually, they get so good at it, and they also get kind of bored with it. So it's time now to add a new scripted conversation in its place, right? So you could have a book on waking up. You could have another conversation on going to the restaurant, another one on how to talk on the phone. So you're actively giving the child things that they can say. And I remember once there was a child who ended up graduating from the Doman Method, a girl named Mila who had Down syndrome. And Mila, at 2.5 years of age, she had already been on our program for over a year. And she walked into my office and I went, "Hi, Mila, how are you?" And, I'm used to severely and profoundly brain injured children who often have no speech. So sometimes I say, "How are you?" And I get no reply, and I'm ready for that. So I said, "How are you?" And 2.5-year-old Mila said, "Well, thank you. And you?" And I was just shocked, like to hear a 2.5-year-old say, "Well, thank you. And you?" And I said to mom and dad, "Oh, look at her. Her speech has come so long." And they went, "Yeah, it's the scripted conversations. We practice. Hi, how are you?" And she's learned how to reply to that question. And that was such an impactful thing for Mila, because she just, every place she entered with confidence and with, people looked at her differently because that was one of the first things she would say to them. And it just was a real game changer. So, and Mila went on to graduate from our program and speaks 2 languages. And, it's just an amazing now teenager. So the scripted conversations for a lot of kids are a great way of improving conversational ability, especially if you've got a child who speaks words or maybe even some simple sentences consistently, but their conversational ability is poor. This is a really good place good activity to do. All right. Well, I want to run through one more activity if we've got the time. I think we do. And this is an activity really for children who speak in sentences but cannot tell stories. The big difference between a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old in their speech development is 3-year-olds will usually say one sentence at a time, right? They can say, "Mommy, I want water." But if you ask them to tell you a story, like if you say, "Hey, what did you do at grandma's today?" they'll probably only give you a 1-sentence reply, right? If they give you anything. If you say, "What did you do at grandma's today?" they'll say, "We went to the park." And this is, with a neurotypical 3-year-old. And if you want more information, you're going to have to ask questions with a 3-year-old. You're going to have to say, "Okay, who did you go to the park with?" And they'll say, "Oh, Grandpa and Sally." "Oh, good." And then you have to ask them, "What did you do at the park?" And they'll say, "Oh, I did the slide in the swing," right? That's what a 3-year-old would do. They wouldn't be able to tell you everything in a chronological story. That's the main difference between a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old. If you say to a 6-year-old, and anyone who has a neurotypical 6-year-old knows this, they come into the house after school or after visiting someone, you say, "Hey, what did you do at grandma's today?" And they will talk your head off, right? They'll give you 20 things. And at a certain point, you're like, "All right, I got the idea. Thank you very much," right? That's the difference between a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. And a 3-year-old, you have to kind of pull information out of them. A 6-year-old will tell you everything in chronological order. And that's a very important neurological organization ability, to be able to sequence information in order. It's so important. So this activity is called recounting events. It's very good to help children go from sentences to speaking in paragraphs. So this is the way it works. As a day is going on with a child, you write down on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper activities in the order that you do them. So for example, let's say you have breakfast in the morning. You say to the child, "Oh, let's go and write down your first daily activity. Number 1, we had eggs for breakfast." Okay. And then you'd say to the child, okay, repeat after me. We had eggs for breakfast. And your child says, we had eggs for breakfast. And you say, great job. Very good. Okay. That's session number one, right? Super easy. You're just writing something that happened and having the child say it. Now, a little later in the day, something else occurs. And you say, oh, let's go back to our daily activities. And let's put down the second thing. We called Uncle Franco on the phone. Right? And you say to your child, repeat after me. We called Uncle Franco on the phone, and the child repeats after you. You say, well done. And then you say, now let's do both of these things back to back. So let's say first we had eggs for breakfast, then we called Uncle Franco on the phone. And your child repeats after you. We had eggs for breakfast, then we called Uncle Franco on the phone. Right? Now your child has just said two things back to back. That's the beginning of starting to sequence information and telling a story. Then you come a little later in the day and you say, oh, let's add our third activity. We went for a walk, right? And now the child's goal is to say three things from memory. Oh, we had eggs for breakfast. Then we called Uncle Franco on the phone. Then we went for a walk, right? So now your child can recall each of these things in order. The reason why we keep building on the list is it gives the child repetition with the same list, right? Each session, they're just adding one new thing. And that allows the child to sequence. Sequencing is such an important neurological ability. Think about all the things we do with sequencing, right? If I give you an instruction with 5 steps, right? If I say, hey, run out to the garage, get the hammer from the toolbox, bring it to your dad in the living room, come back to me when that's done. You have to sequence that information in order, right? And many parents will tell me, oh, if I give my child multiple step instructions, my child gets lost. They're all over the place. That's because the child cannot sequence information. And so this activity is all about sequencing. And very often, interestingly, when a child speaks in sentences, you need pretty developed speech to speak in sentences. The big jump from sentences to paragraphs is not so much a speech development thing. It's a neurological organizational thing. And so if we can improve neurological organization, and we have many tools for doing that, we can get a child telling stories. So this is one of the activities that we would do with a child to help them tell stories. So those are 3 different activities we've run through today. We talked about songs. That's for any child. We've talked about scripted conversations. That's for children who, aren't very confident with conversations. And then we have recounting events, which is about getting children to speak in paragraphs and tell stories. And you can see that with some children, we will build this out. We will get them to remember 5 to 6 different things in a story. But we usually start with 3 things. And when they're good with that, we build them up. Now, we have probably 30 different speech development activities that we use with children at different stages of speech, because we work with children all the way from children who have not said any meaningful words, all the way to children who have very mild speech issues like a lisp or a stutter or slight articulation issues. So we've dealt with, over the last 70 years, children in all of those areas. And obviously, those children need very different kinds of programs to develop their speech. We last time we counted, we have over 30 different speech development activities. So, but those 3 are really good places to start, depending on where your child is. All right. Well, listen, we've got, about 15 minutes for questions. Let's jump into it. Oh, we got a comment here on Instagram. I love this activity. My boy with Down syndrome loved the song activity, and we started doing this, and it really works, both for articulation and spontaneous speech. Thank you very much. That's great. All right. We've got a question here about eyesight. Once you start to show pictures and words to a baby, is it useful to train his light reflex? I've been doing the light reflex for 3 months now, and he is 7 months old. So it depends on the child. If a child's light reflex, and let me just make a quick comment here for people who don't know about this. For some children with visual problems at Doman International, we do something called light reflex stimulation, where we use a gentle household flashlight and we stimulate the pupils of the eyes using light to stimulate the reflex. The light reflex is a primitive reflex in babies, but very often it's underdeveloped with children with special needs because the brain doesn't process the information of light correctly. And so when we provide light reflex stimulation, it doesn't just improve the reflex, it improves their overall visual ability. It often improves visual awareness, the distance that a child can see, the clarity that a child sees. So to answer your question, it really depends on if your baby now has a light reflex that looks like a normal light reflex, or is it still delayed, or is it inconsistent? If it's still delayed or inconsistent, you should keep stimulating the light reflex. If it looks like everyone else's light reflex, like it looks at like the siblings or your spouse's light reflex, then you can likely stop it. I know that you're gonna come, Ella. Is that right? Colleen, am I using the correct name? Okay.
That's
Yeah, I think
exactly
last
right.
week I
Yeah.
called you Emma.
Oh yeah, Ella.
Yeah,
We'll see her
mistakenly.
in July.
I know that you're going to come in July, and we can evaluate, because with every child we evaluate all their reflexes when they come for an evaluation. So of course we'll check the light reflex and let you know if it's normal or not. But if I were you, I would check it now and then use that determination to continue with it or not. Yeah. Okay, perfect. I've got a comment here from Elena who says, that's amazing about the scripted conversations. That's what I'm looking for my 9-year-old, transitioning from sentence to paragraph or stories. Yeah, so most likely the scripted conversations and then the last activity I talked about, which was recounting events, would probably both be very, very helpful. All right. Oh, and I did want to go back. Johanna had asked us a question about, having difficulty understanding what her child says. One of the great things about the scripted conversations is you and your child have already agreed on what they're going to say. So even if your child has articulation issues, it'll help develop your ability to understand what they're saying, right? Because they have their part, you know what it is. And so even if they don't say it with perfect articulation, it will help you with understanding your kid. Annabella is saying, yes, these activities are still appropriate for a 9-year-old child with apraxia who currently uses only 2 words. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Now, for a child who only uses 2 words, the song activity is going to be the most helpful. The scripted conversation, it depends on the child, because Annabella, and you can give me this kind of follow-up information. When you say that Vanessa only says 2 words, do you mean there are only 2 words that she says, or only 2 words that she says consistently? Because those are two, quite different things. For a child who only says 2 words, of course we can do speech development activities, but doing things like scripted conversations might be more difficult. We might have to do more kind of introductory activities to prepare a child for that. If a child says 2 words consistently, but then maybe repeats other words occasionally, or maybe they have inconsistent words, then doing scripted conversations for those kids can be very helpful, because with the scripted conversation, they get repetition, and very often they'll start to say the words more consistently as you do it. When you're beginning with the oh yeah, Annabelle is saying only 2 words consistently. Okay. Because sometimes when I begin with a scripted conversation, I will give the child parts. Their part will be words that they've already said in the past but aren't consistent. So like, let's say a child says mom and dad consistently, and they say water, but not consistently. Then in the conversation, I'll give them the word water. So the parent will say, what do you want to drink? And the child answers water. And it's just it's a fun, relaxed way to encourage a child to say a word more, more often. So yeah, It's good to write scripted conversations in a strategic way to give the child words that you think they can be successful in, because of course we want the child to feel successful with the activity. Yeah, going back to talking about visual stimulation, yes, that is me. I'm worried that his eyes might not be ready for reading. Probably he is, given my experience. For me, it's more of a question. Oh, so let me flip your question a little bit around, Ella. If your question is, does a child's light reflex have to be perfect for you to start reading? The answer is no. And in fact, I've seen children who can read books independently, but they still don't have a perfect light reflex. So it's not necessarily the case that a child needs a perfect light reflex for you to start reading.
My light reflex in my left eye is slightly logy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, slightly. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's just been forever, but heaven knows I can read.
Yeah. Yes, you can. Yeah. And then there's so many things that can impact the quality of the light reflex. So for some children that are on medications will often have a delayed light reflex. Sometimes it's a sign of an oxygenation issue. So yeah, it depends on the person. All right, let's see what else we've got here. All right, we've got a comment on Instagram. My son is 14 years old with autism. Gestalt language processing, will these activities help? Yes. Yeah, that's my short answer. Absolutely. These activities can be helpful for children of all ages. And like I said, regardless of speech development. I would recommend, because I know there are many people here who are kind of new to the program. So just a couple of places you can learn more about our language program. So first of all, if you get our books, right, like the Doman Method from Special Needs to Wellness, or if you've got a child with an autism diagnosis, we have the book Answering Autism. Both of these books have chapters on speech development. And so they actually have additional activities in the books that I didn't mention today. The second thing is that, when you speak to Colleen about, the possibility of coming to Doman International for an appointment, Colleen can give you access to online courses that we have. And one of those online courses is a speech development course. So, if you reach out to Colleen, you talk to her, she can give you access to certain online video courses where, the slides I showed you are from the speech development course. I just go into a lot more detail in that course than I did today. And of course, for anyone who ever does an in-person or an online appointment at Doman International in the future, we customize speech programs for kids. So we tell parents, okay, based on where your child is right now in speech, here are the best activities for you to do with your child. This is how often to do them. We decide what's the goal. Do we want to improve a child's conversational ability? Do we want to get them from speaking words to speaking sentences? It completely depends on the child. So that's what our clinical staff does. And so all the activities we have either created or we've learned from others, but they are all results driven. Because it's very common, parents will come to us and say, we've done 3 years of speech therapy and we've gotten nowhere with it. And that's really, really unfortunate. And so all of our activities are results based. If you start one of our activities and you don't have results after a couple of months, we'll just say, okay, stop that activity and let's start a new one in its place. All right, let's see if we've got other questions here. Oh, just because I know we've got some new people here, I will throw up. That's a funny way of saying it. I will put up on the screen Colleen's contact information. Let me see. There it is. Perfect. Colleen, we didn't have any pre-submitted questions today, right?
We did not. No.
Okay, good. All right, everyone. Well, we've still got a couple more minutes. So if you have any other questions, it could be about speech development or about anything else, you can throw it into the comments box and we will give it an answer.
I do have a question that was sent to me by a mother. I got it over the weekend, so I haven't responded to her yet, but I think it might be good to answer it here, if that's okay.
Sure.
So this mother, Ashley, has a son who's 9 years old. He had epilepsy, but she says it was mild for many years, but more recently, seizures have worsened in both type and frequency. He hasn't experienced any regressions. He's right where he should be academically, but he does present with some motor issues that seem to wax and wane. She's wondering if the Doman method is appropriate for Jack, or if it's more for children with more pronounced developmental challenges.
Yeah. So the answer is absolutely. It would be useful for Jack, and in fact, we even have worked with kids with milder issues than Jack. And in terms of the different things you mentioned, from the epilepsy to also those milder motor issues, we have programs that can help with all of those things. We have different mobility programs that are designed to improve coordination and balance, and the vestibular areas of the brain to help a child be better coordinated. And then for epilepsy, we have both respiratory and physical programs to help reduce seizures and hopefully even prevent them entirely. So absolutely, I think Jack would be an excellent candidate for the program.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Any idea where Jack lives, Colleen?
No, no idea yet. No, I will reach out to mother though. I just thought when I read her question, this is something that I just spoke with a parent last week who said, I know the Doman method is for children who are, very severely motor compromised. And I said, no, not necessarily. I mean, yes, but also that doesn't mean your child won't benefit. So I think sometimes people hear bits and pieces about what we do, and they get the idea that what we do is not for them, because, oh, my child doesn't have this issue or my child doesn't have that issue. And the fact is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Spencer, the rest of the world kind of breaks kids into their symptoms, and focuses in on specific symptoms and uses that to say, oh, well, you shouldn't do this because your kid doesn't have these symptoms. But from our perspective, the symptoms are just that, a symptom of a neurological issue. Because our program addresses the brain directly, we can help with an incredible variety of challenges, mild, and I really hate mild too, because the fact is, if your kid is struggling, there's no mild about it. You're watching them have a hard time and thinking, I need to do something about this now.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's no such thing, to be honest, as a mild brain injury, because even if often it's those children that kind of look like everyone else, but they have that slight speech issue, or they have seizures, or they have a learning difficulty, or motor coordination issues, that it makes it very difficult for them to succeed in the world, because everyone looks at them and says, oh, you're kind of like everyone else, but you're a little different. And it's not fair to them, but it just is the way the world is. And unfortunately, the world just doesn't understand. When I see those people, I go, oh, that's a child or a person with a mild neurological problem. I get it, but a lot of people don't have that level of understanding. So absolutely, I mean, we can help kids like Jack, and we have for decades. And to your point, Colleen, there are right before this session, I was speaking to a mom in India who has two daughters who have some very mild neurological issues, but they also have symptoms that appear very psychological. They have anxiety issues. One of them has something called selective mutism, where she only talks to certain people and not other people. And I was explaining to the parent the neurological roots behind a lot of these issues, and the parent has seen progress in these areas after starting a neurological program that we've prescribed. The mom actually said that starting some of the physical activities like crawling and creeping was the first thing she's ever seen help her daughter with anxiety issues. So sometimes there's progress even in areas that you would never think are connected. You wouldn't think that doing certain motor activities that involve both sides of the brain would reduce anxiety, but for this young woman, it has.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we've got a few more questions here. Annabella says, is it okay to encourage her to make sounds during play, or could that feel too invasive for her? It completely depends on the child, because some children intuitively hate being put on the spot, where, every parent knows this feeling where the child says a word and grandparents come over and you say, hey kid, say the word you said before, say dad, and the child just shuts down, right? Now that they're being asked to perform for others. That's very common and typical. What I found is that when children hit a specific place in their speech development, they usually start to become more confident of their speech and more self-motivated to talk. And when children hit that point, very often they initiate performing, like they want to show off a new word that they say, or sometimes they'll even work with parents to better articulate their sounds. They'll say a word and they'll look at parents kind of like, did I say that correctly? And parents can guide them. So it really depends. If a child is in that second category, like you see a self-motivation of theirs to talk and they're not self-conscious about their speech, then absolutely you can do that with them. But if you find your child is shutting down when you ask them to do something, then don't do it. They're not ready for it yet. And what we have to do is we just have to do activities to get them talking more. When they talk more, their confidence improves, and then they start initiating on their own. All right, we've got a comment here from Josepa who says, hi, what do you think about autism and regression? Namely, my daughter lost her speech after she was 18 months old and now has epilepsy. She is 8 and used about 2 to 25 words, but not consistently. And uses about 2 to 25 words, but not consistently. Sometimes she says whole sentences, especially when she's really motivated. And mostly she does not talk. She reads and understands everything. Thank you. We are on the program for 6 months now, and she is a lot better. Great. All right, great, Josepa. So what do I think about regression? So children diagnosed with autism and virtually every kind of developmental delay tend to be more physiologically sensitive than other children. So they're more likely to have a bad reaction to a medication or even to supplements. I recently had a teenage girl on our program who she's doing amazing on our program, incredible results. Out of nowhere, she started to show erratic behavior. And fortunately, one of our nutritionists said, hey, let's eliminate, by the way, if you hear howling, it's my husky complaining to me that I'm not paying attention to her. But this teenage girl was, started to act erratically. And one of our nutritionists fortunately said, hey, why don't we stop the vitamin B supplement that we started recently? Because our nutritionist had started vitamin B because she had presented low vitamin B levels. And when we stopped the vitamin B, the child's behavior returned to normal. Now, vitamin B is an incredibly important supplement. I take it. Many children on our program need it because they burn through their vitamin B stores quickly or their body doesn't produce enough vitamin B. But for that specific girl, there was something about the vitamin B supplement that didn't agree with her. And I make this point to just say, children are often having negative responses to foods, medications, supplements, potentially even vaccinations because of their own physiological sensitivities. And there's no testing right now to know what child is going to react badly to what specific thing. So I'm sure, Josepa, if you saw that happen, I'm sure it happened. I don't question that. And unfortunately, I have seen regression in many children, but there's a reason for it. And that's sometimes people will talk about regression like it's some kind of mystical thing without a reason. There's always a reason. The truth is, are we smart enough to figure it out? That's what it's really about. So to give you an example, Josepha, and you may not have had this experience because your daughter hasn't had a regression, hopefully, while on the program. This was when she was very young. But if a child ever experiences a regression while on the Doman International program, we have something called the physiological troubleshooting checklist. And we get on a call with the family and we ask them 75 questions of things that we found that children have. We say, have you started any supplements in the last month? No. Okay. Has your child started swim lessons? No. Okay. Do you have any dust issues in the house? And we run through these things. Have you started using a new soap or detergent? Because we've seen some children along the line have a negative reaction to one of those things. And these are things that there are very few practitioners in the world. There are some, but there are very few who are attentive to these details. But it's really, really important. So, Josepha, to kind of wrap up answering your question, because it's a very good one. Regressions do occur, but all the speech activities I've recommended would likely be helpful for Hannah. And I do recommend, I know you've been on the program for 6 months. A part of coming for the appointments is you get access to all the advanced courses. If you haven't watched the Enhancing Speech course yet, please write your staff coach and say, hey, Spencer recommended the Enhancing Speech course for me. And they'll send you a link so you can watch it. Because definitely there are activities you can be doing regularly at home that would help her regain more of her speech back faster. The good news is when children speak more and then they lose some of that speech, regaining it is easier than gaining it for the first time, because the brain cells retain some memory of the past. The brain cells retain some memory of the past of what they've done. Okay. All right, everyone. One last question. I'm really glad we're getting so many questions. My child is 5 years old and has autism and has -12 in one eye. What could you recommend as activities? So interestingly, if a child has a really bad visual issue in a single eye, the light reflex stimulation that we discussed earlier could be helpful. And light reflex stimulation is discussed in this book, The Doman Method from Special Needs to Wellness, in the visual integration chapter, which is chapter 14. There are instructions there about how to do light reflex stimulation. So yeah, if you've got the book, it is page 161 is all about the light reflex. It even gives you recommendations on what kind of tools to use. All right, everyone. Well, I've thrown up Colleen's contact information up there on the screen if you're interested in reaching out. It's great to see so many new faces. Please reach out, talk to Colleen, and we'll be back here next week at the same time. Next week, the topic of conversation is, what kinds of children with special needs can be helped by the Doman Method? So what kind of diagnoses do we help? What children are eligible? What children may not be eligible? All right. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a really great rest of your week.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thanks, Colleen.
Bye.